Welcome to the Sidewalk CEO podcast, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Each week, the Sidewalk CEO speaks with Frankfort area business owners about their journeys, sharing insights and firsthand experiences that can help fuel your path to success. Here are your hosts, Sherri Donahue, CEO and Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist of Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity, and Leo Haggerty, founder of TCHQ Communications.
And I am Leo Haggerty with TCHQ Communications, along with my partner in crime,
Sherri Donahue from Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity.
Welcome to the latest issue, or edition, or episode? I guess episode.
It's funny that you use those terms, given our guest today.
Well, maybe that's why I'm so confused.
Probably
but
is.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Sidewalk CEO. Each week, we talk with people who are in business in the Franklin County area, find out how they got started, what kind of challenges they faced over the years, and maybe what's coming down the road in their business and in their profession.
And what they can advise others who are thinking about the same types of things.
Absolutely. So today we're moving into journalism, which is
this is a new one for us.
This is a new one for us,
like
yes. We have Laura Cullen Glasscock. She is the editor and publisher of the Kentucky Gazette. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I know you don't like talking about yourself, but we're going to start with that anyhow.
We're going to make you.
Yeah.
The doors are locked. You can't get out.
Oh, no.
We're a very tough interview.
And you have a dog.
Yes.
And we have a dog, a mean one, you can tell.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell
Okay,
folks.
so went to high school in Oldham County, which may be too far back to start, but I think people like to know where folks are from these days,
definitely.
or especially Kentuckians. We like to know if we know anybody, right?
It's always, where'd you go to high school? When
Where'd you
people
go to
say, where'd
school?
you go to school, they
Where
don't
are you
mean
from?
college.
That's a very Louisville thing, though.
Oh, okay.
In
No.
Eastern Kentucky, it's so who
County.
you kin to that I might know.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they say
Or-
what county they're
Yeah,
from.
exactly.
Yes.
Right.
So undergrad at EKU, speaking of Eastern Kentucky. I have a master's degree from UK and one from the University of Illinois Springfield. And that one from UIS is specifically in public affairs journalism. So I am trained and well-trained, I think, to cover state government and public affairs. Just for example, when I was there, I had a graduate class in campaign finance. The whole class was campaign finance. And so it's a really strong program.
So folks that might not be familiar with the Kentucky Gazette who are listening, what is the Kentucky Gazette?
The Kentucky Gazette is a niche publication. We call ourselves a journal, and we cover state government, politics, and public affairs.
So your background is very appropriate.
Yes.
Okay. And how long have you been covering government and public affairs?
Oh, about 30 years now.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I started working at the Gazette in 1998 when the late Lowell Reese owned the paper. He resurrected the Gazette in 1995. And some of your history fans might know the Kentucky Gazette actually is the oldest newspaper west of the Allegheny Mountains. Now, we haven't been in constant publication. It started and ceased many times over the centuries. But the paper was founded in 1787, so before Kentucky was a state. And the publishers then advocated for statehood from Virginia. So it has a very rich history.
Wow.
It was started in Lexington by a publisher named John Bradford.
And I think you and I have talked in the past that if you Google the Kentucky Gazette, you can find historical listings dating back to that time where they had ads for slave to be
Oh,
purchased.
my gosh. Are you
Horrible.
serious?
Yeah.
Well, it's 1700s.
Yes, it was
Whoa.
terrible.
Yeah.
There are editions of the Kentucky Gazette in the Library of Congress as well. So there is that history. But yeah, to Leo's point, it's documented the brutal history of the United States and Kentucky.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Phew.
Yes.
So how did you end up owning the Gazette?
I bought the Gazette in 2007 from Lowell Reese. And as I say, Lowell resurrected the paper in 1995, and I went to work for him in 98. And I had a little hiatus there where I worked at Toyota Motor Manufacturing in corporate communications for a few years, and then went back to journalism.
Okay. And so you've owned it for quite some time now, and you've seen presidential elections, governor's races, COVID. what would you say are a couple of the biggest stories that you've covered in your time as owner?
Well, it's interesting. I'm hesitating here. So the Gazette is not a paper of record, right? So we don't chase the same stories that, say, the Herald Leader, the Courier Journal, or now the Kentucky Lantern cover. They do a great job covering the day-to-day goings-on in Frankfort. We do more analysis pieces.
Which is what makes you a journal as opposed to a newspaper.
Yeah, we're published as a newspaper. I mean, we're printed physically on newsprint, yeah. But our content is quite different. So there are lots of tables in the Kentucky Gazette. We like to go through records. For example, we go through public service contracts and list those in the back of the paper. People like to read that, like sports junkies read the agate in the sports pages, right? And so we're a little bit different. So we don't really, quote unquote, break stories typically. Although I will say that I did break the story when David Williams was running for governor. I was the one who found where that $1 million from his father-in-law came from and went to. So, and I was real pleased that a former Courier Journal reporter, Tom Loftus, came down to my office, which was on Capitol Avenue at the time. And Tom said, "Congratulations, you found it. The rest of us couldn't find it."
Wow.
And, it was just digging through records and following the money trail.
Were other reporters looking for it at the time?
I think so. I think so. But that's like the only time, because we don't do that. I mean, that's not our function. We do more.
But what do you think
pieces.
the piece in your time owning it that has had the greatest impact on the people of Kentucky that you've done coverage of?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I really
think about that, and we'll get back to you.
Well, now, when Lowell resurrected the Gazette, did he do it with the intention that it would be on like politics and that sort of thing?
Actually, no. That's a good question, Sherri. When Lowell first started the paper, he wanted it to compete with the State Journal because he lived here in Frankfort and felt like the State Journal didn't have enough state government coverage. And so, but he was trying to compete with them. That turned out to be a little more formidable than he had anticipated. And so he kind of switched over and moved into that creating it as more of a niche publication that it is today, focusing on state government. We do a lot of election stuff. I think there are some things, back to your point, Leo, maybe not so much affect Kentuckians, the stories we write, but they inform Kentuckians, and they're more for insiders. Our audience is very much an insider audience. The governor's office gets the paper, Secretary of State's office, Senator McConnell's office gets the paper. So, we run through those people, the folks up at the LRC, state agencies, lawmakers, judge executives, lawyers, lots of lobbyists subscribe. They're probably our biggest base of subscribers. But so we don't really, I wouldn't say that the Gazette's purpose, to your previous question.
But I wasn't really asking that it was your coverage that made it the big story or affected people, but what do you see of the last 15 or 20 years was the biggest things that have happened?
Oh, okay. I took that the wrong way.
Yeah.
The big stories would be COVID and how it's affected government, obviously.
And it really still is. I mean, I talk to people, and maybe people who listen who aren't in Frankfort don't know this, but I mean, it really still is impacting government to this day.
Yeah, it is. There's still, and there are, I'd say one thing that I've seen as a trend that I think is a little disturbing is the lack of transparency in government, or the declining transparency. And a couple of things come to mind. First, it's difficult sometimes to get information from state government, the executive branch sometimes. And then on the legislative side, a couple of years ago, lawmakers exempted themselves from the State Open Records Act. So we're seeing more and more opaqueness as far as the workings of government. And as a journalist and as a citizen, I think that's not okay. They need to be more responsive to the public via the media. I mean, we are, yes, there is social media and they can post their stuff out there, but that's not always put in context or allowed a counterpoint and those sorts of things.
Well, and to your point, the real bad thing about that is a lot of people will look at social media as their source of news. And like you said, it's not vetted, it's not verified, it's not, you don't have that opposing view. And so people falsely believe that is what they're reading on social media is true.
That's right. And that's why you see so many news stories that are generated from posts, right? Because someone will take a post, say, from the president, and they'll explain it, the context, what it means, and how it could affect people, how it could affect Americans, so that the post itself becomes news. But yeah, sometimes people forget that X, Twitter, Instagram, those are platforms. They're not news sources, really. They can be made, as we were just saying, to generate news, but they're platforms, just like a piece of paper's platform. You can have a Herald Leader in your hand, and that's a platform. That paper is not the news itself. Is not the news.
Let me ask you this: when you went to college, and really more times than not, people go to school to do something that they end up doing something completely different. But it sounds to me like what you went to school for was to do exactly what you're doing now.
That is right.
So
I'm very fortunate.
Why was it that you decided to go into that?
Oh, it's a good question. So when I went back to grad school, I was in my early 30s, and I had been teaching at Kentucky State University here in Frankfort. And I got a flyer in the mail, actually, in my office. I was advisor to student publications, and I thought, this looks cool. And I was interested in state government, again, having been working here in Frankfort. And so I applied, and I got accepted. And so I went.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are other folks, too, I mean, who are graduates of that program, who your listeners might know. One is Michonne Lindstrom, the press secretary for Secretary of State Michael Adams. She's a graduate of the program. Joe Bisk, who used to work in the Associated Press Bureau in the Capitol here, he's a graduate. My former colleague, Kate McCann, who worked with us at the Gazette, she's a graduate of the PAR program. Chad Carlton, who owns a PR firm in Louisville. So there are a lot of us out there. Probably the program's most famous graduate is Dana Perino.
Ooh.
Wow.
She graduated a year ahead of me, but I don't know her. Can't claim that. But, yeah.
I want to get back to the business aspect of it, but before we do that, so if somebody's listening and they are concerned, and we had an intern in the office back in over the winter, and he said quite proudly that he got his news from TikTok, and I was just appalled. But I've seen surveys that show that particularly people under 30, social media is their number one source for quote unquote self-identified what they call news. And particularly for people college age and younger, it's TikTok. What would you say to somebody who's listening who is concerned about whether what they're consuming via social media is real or not? How do they tell whether it's fake news or real news, or what for you is a trigger?
Okay, so there's a lot of responses I can think of for that, Leo. First of all, TikTok's another platform. So it depends who is talking on TikTok, right? And if they are, journalists and lawmakers have TikTok accounts, and news organizations have TikTok accounts. And I think you can rely on that sort of thing. But you have to be a little suspect, or as the kids say, sus, the kids watching who are on TikTok. My son's going to kill me if he ever hears me say that in public. But
it's just us talking here. Don't worry.
That's right. That's right. Don't use slang. Anyway, so it just depends who is the speaker, who is the provider, the information provider on TikTok. One thing I used to tell my students at K-State, and just to jump back to K-State, until spring of 2024, I was an assistant professor of journalism at K-State, and I taught full-time there as well. But I would tell my students, one thing that sets journalists apart is we are trained to be objective. So if you think about first responders, for example, they have to set their personal feelings aside to run into a fire, to grab somebody out of a car crash, or to perform emergency room surgery, right? You have to separate yourself. And that's what journalists do. We're trained to remove our personal opinions and points of view from what we're covering. That's not to say we don't have them, and that's not to say people don't make mistakes and things slip through the cracks, but we try really, really hard not to. And the second thing is, in our training, we subscribe, for the most of us, to a code of ethics. The Kentucky Gazette subscribes to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. And in that code of ethics, we are told and taught to do no harm, to seek the truth and report it, not to abuse the power that we have to influence elections or others, or to harm people who, may be private citizens pulled into an event unwillingly, for example. And the third thing is, people need to understand the difference between news and reporting and the editorial page. And what we see on TV a lot is a video representation of the editorial page, in my view. You've got a lot of talking heads analyzing and giving opinions, which is good and fine, but it's not news. And the public, I think, confuses those, conflates those, and wants to say, oh, journalists are biased, when really we try really hard not to. And I know I'm getting long.
No, you're good.
Leo's sucking his breath.
No, I actually had a follow up. So go ahead.
Oh, thanks. But one of the highest compliments I've had is I've had two separate people, both journalists who I respect greatly here in Frankfurt, tell me they don't know what political party I belong to, and I think that's good.
That's quite a compliment.
It's the coffee party, right?
Yeah, right. It's the party. But I take that as a high compliment, and I'm glad that people don't know, and they shouldn't know, and it shouldn't. And to me, that shows that nothing is leaking through the Gazette's coverage.
You're doing your job correctly, and so. And I guess to what you're talking about, when you see these pundits, I guess this all happened when we started going to 24-hour news, and they have all these news stories. They have to fill time with all these, and so you get a lot of like these morning news shows that are on for 3 or 4 hours every morning, and then you have these well-known journalists on there, but they're also talking about things and they are giving their opinions. And so that's got to be difficult for their credibility, maybe. It's good that they're discussing it, analyzing things, but when they then go back in the next day, they have a story in the New York Times or Washington Post that they've written. I guess people may be looking at that saying, okay, they're giving me that story, but it's through the viewpoint of their political leanings.
Well, I would submit that a journalist, like a trained reporter, not necessarily one of the pundits, but the reporter probably would not. So if your listeners watch Comment on Kentucky, for example, we'll analyze things when we're on that program on KET, which, by the way, everyone should donate to because they just got federal funding cut. Yeah. But Comment on Kentucky, we try really hard to be objective. We'll analyze things and perhaps voice observations, but we don't, for the most part, say give grand opinions about things.
And you do an excellent job on that, by the way. When I know you're on, I watch you. I know that you're, when you talk, I listen. You're E.F. Hutton.
Thank you.
I feel like you have very good input and insight into the stories that you do. So
thanks. Well,
so part of it's I guess this is my personal opinion. I want to see what yours is. That a lot of the problems has come from journalism becoming corporate. I mean, when even back we go 10, 15 years ago, the major media outlets were usually owned generationally by families. And now they're being owned by corporations who have shareholders. I was talking a while back to one of the more prominent reporters in Kentucky who was getting out of reporting, and I said, why? And he said, well, I write a story and it goes up on the website, and an hour later I get an email from our corporate overlord saying, change this headline or change the lead because we're not getting enough clicks.
Oh.
And
yeah.
you are not corporately owned. You are the owner. You are family owned.
That's correct.
Do you think that is part of what's driving it, is the striving for the almighty dollar, or is it more ideological?
I think it's Wall Street, and I'm not an economist, and I haven't studied this, but just anecdotally, when the big companies realized decades ago that small town newspapers were making a steady 7, 8, 9% return every year, profit every year, it was a solid business, nothing, solid local businesses and monopolies in most communities, right? So these bigger companies started buying them up. Same happened with family-owned TV stations and radio, because you can make money. But yeah, I think that's part of it. And then those bigger companies have debt, and they have to justify spending, so they cut back on travel for reporters, for example. Here in Frankfurt, the size of the State House press corps has shrunk dramatically since I've been here. And, we're responsible for that at the Gazette. That COVID hit us really hard, and we're still trying to rebound from that. But I don't have any full-time reporters right now myself. When I bought the paper from Lowell, there were 2 full-time, Kate and me, and we had some freelancers, and now I use mostly freelancers. But aside from that, I don't have to respond to Wall Street, and I don't have to make decisions based on money necessarily, or pleasing someone else's idea of what profit should look like, or what gets cut, or those types of things. Does that make sense? I'm kind of rambling.
So are there many other similar type newspapers like yours in other states, or is it okay?
No, there are quite a few in other states. Yeah, I'd say most states have, maybe not in newspaper format, but certainly newsletters. The political newsletter is very popular in
now,
place.
and you have recently gone online, is that correct?
Well, we've had a website. It has a hardy paywall, though, because we do print as well still. And in fact, we went back to print a year ago in July. And we just feel like that's how how our readers want their news, is to.
Well, I mean, I get the print version, and
Thank you.
I'm more likely to look at that than to look at it online.
So, I got that from a lot of people. A friend of mine who was an attorney in Somerset, he said if he would carry the Gazette in his briefcase, and if he was waiting for court or between clients, he'd read it. But if he didn't have it with him, he didn't think to go online and look.
Right.
Yes, we don't publish a lot of stuff online. I'll post the print version as a PDF after it comes out in print. And there are a few things, if something's kind of breaking, I'll post on there. But back to Leo's point, I just thought of this too. But I think when big media companies have to answer to Wall Street, it does change the newsroom. Maybe not as much ideologically as functionally. And the State House News Bureau here, news bureaus, Dick Wilson, who a lot of your listeners might remember, he was a reporter for the Courier-Journal. And he told me when he was here, the Courier-Journal State House Bureau had 9 full-time reporters, 9 just for the Courier-Journal when the Bingham still owned the paper. And he covered higher ed. That was his beat. He worked in Frankfurt, covered higher ed. Wow. And we don't have that anymore.
So if you had the ability to go back in time to talk to a younger Laura, what have you learned over the years that you wish you knew back when you bought the Gazette in 2007?
I wish
Besides who was going to win all the World Series?
No, I'd want to know the lotto numbers. What?
Oh.
Yeah. Think big, Leo. Come on.
Yeah. I think for me, I was raised on the journalism side, right? And becoming a publisher and making that switch to the other side, so to speak, where I had to raise money for the paper, deal with the business side of things. I wish I had had more training in that, more exposure to that, because that's a weakness, and it's still a weakness today. I do have a colleague who works she's our advertising publisher, and she does a great job. Donna Hodgson helps me out with stuff. And
folks, if you are interested in subscribing or you'd like to advertise, we will have information on how to contact the Gazette in the show notes.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. I would do a drum roll, but yeah, so I forgot what I was saying, Leo.
Becoming a publisher.
Oh, becoming a publisher,
side.
right. Just the business side of things. Like, I am not a big fan of doing invoicing. Like, some people out there probably say, yeah, I haven't had an invoice since April. It's like, yeah, because I haven't sent them out. So I'm just really not keen on that, to be quite frank. So that's the weakness. And if I had to go back, I would tell myself, find someone to help you in that regard before it gets to be something that's,
I think
overwhelming.
It's kind of like doctors who they go to medical school to be a doctor, and then when they open up their own practice, now they have to be HR and manage their the insurances and all the things that go along with running a business. Mm-hmm. And they went to school to be a doctor, not to run a business, but that's part of it. If you,
that's a good analogy. It is. I think anyone who's trained in a certain way and then opens a business doesn't see that side of it. I think another thing too is I probably would have reached out maybe to for, I don't know, I don't want to say venture capitalists, because I have a great bank here in town, Independence Bank, and they were very helpful through all of this. But I would have worked a little harder, I think, to drive revenue. Yeah, investors maybe, but just to drive more revenue. I focused so much on the journalism side that other half just kind of was secondary, and it shouldn't have been.
Well, it's a real balance you had to keep, as far as wanting to keep it pure and also having to do the business side of it. That's a lot for one
I understand
person to
those
handle.
printers are pretty pesky about wanting to get paid for paper and ink.
That's right. That's right. No, I take my checkbook with me when I pick up the Gazette.
They say don't pick a fight with somebody who buys ink by the barrel, but that means they're buying it. So
that's right. That's right. So.
Well, and you all do the voter guides, which you don't do voter guides. Okay.
No.
Recaps though.
We do recaps.
I should be election. Yeah.
Yeah, we cover elections. We like to go in deep with those, and we'll, especially with the state elections.
Yes,
and we dig into campaign finance and money trails. Story on the August-September edition of the Gazette is on Senator McConnell's leadership PAC, the Bluegrass Committee. So we cover topics like that aren't generally.
Right.
So since it's just the three of us talking, is there any news stories that are going to break here in the next few weeks that might surprise somebody?
No, not that I know of.
Okay.
Well, I mean, not that I can say.
But
I was going to say, yeah.
But if you were willing to subscribe, you'd let me know.
Right. I said that on comment one time. This was months ago, I guess, and I don't know why I said it on TV, but we were talking about the elections, and I said, yeah, there are some other names floating around, and Bill Bryant asked me who it was, and I said, you'll have to subscribe.
That's awesome.
I can't give everything away on TV.
You have to subscribe.
But we do. I mean, and that's the thing, too. I think to a point you made earlier, Sherri, the objectivity and the business side, I think that's what allows the Gazette to have good conversations with our sources, too, because I talk to people on both sides of the political aisle. I talk to libertarians and folks, Gatewood Galbraith type, Green Party, whoever's around. And And they trust us. They trust me when they're talking with me. If they tell me something's on background or off the record, that I keep it there. I'll use what they say. I know my sources. I trust them. And I try to use the information in a proper context. We don't take stuff that people say out of context. We don't mislead. I've never lied to a source about what I'm doing with our conversation. And I think because of that, I'm able to get good information for solid stories.
Okay.
So of all of the people that you've interviewed in your entire career, who is the most interesting?
Gatewood Galbraith. Yep, the late, great Gatewood. He was very interesting. He's a very nice man, too.
The first time I met Gatewood was, probably 2004, maybe 2007. But I was in Lexington with a friend. We stopped to get gas, and this big old caddy pulled up on the other side, and the door opened, and all this smoke came pouring out, and there was Gatewood. And my friend knew him previously, and we got introduced there. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I've got one more. I don't know if Sherri's got anything else. Traditional media certainly has been struggling in this economy and with all of the various new media that's been popping up. From your perspective, particularly small market, what does small market traditional media need to do to survive?
Well, I don't know if I'm one to give that kind of advice, but cover things that other people aren't covering. So you have to cover your community. And in my case, the community is the movers and shakers in Frankfort and government. It's easy to say media are failing. And I'm hesitating here because that's something we hear from the current administration in Washington, is that the news is failing, fake news. It's witch hunts and lies and hoaxes and stuff. And it's really not. And I think media do a bad job of defending ourselves, right? Legitimate media do a bad job of defending ourselves and of explaining to people what we do. That's why when we had the conversation, we three, before this podcast, and I said, I want to make sure we talk about the code of ethics, because we don't explain to people that we have a code of ethics that we subscribe to. And as far as your question, Leo, about what can they do, I think if they are candid and honest and admit to mistakes when we make them, people respect that. Everyone makes mistakes. I think if we are logical in what we cover and fair, I think people will come along with that. I'll just leave it there. I don't know that I'm like the person to give grand advice, not being an economist.
Well, you've been there and done. You've been there and done that, though, and a lot of people haven't.
Well, that's true too.
And I think that advice is sound regardless of if any business you're in where the industry has been around for a while. Look for areas that are underserved. Look for doing something a little differently, which you do. You report differently than, say, a daily newspaper does. Try to fill a need that's not being addressed.
Exactly. And do it properly. Yep. I can give an example of that. After I finished grad school in Illinois, I took a job in California at the Watsonville Register Pajaronian, which pajaro is Spanish for bird.
Oh.
And I was the city editor there, and then left there and went to Manteca, California, which is in the Central Valley. And I was city editor there, and then I became senior editor. But as the city editor in that market in particular, Manteca is 80 miles or so, maybe 90 miles from the Bay Area. And so as a daily paper, we were competing not only with the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Jose Mercury News, but also the Stockton Record, the Modesto Bee, the Sacramento Bee. The paper in Tracy and Livermore, Pleasanton had the Daily Herald, I think it was called, right? So we had all this competition all around us. We were hyper local. The family who owned the paper, back to your point, family owned, our mandate was no wire copy on the first 3 pages. First 3 pages of the paper were 100% local. And we ran Little League box scores on the sports pages and girls soccer, box scores. And people bought the paper because their kids were in it and because they knew why the city was moving the fire hydrant from there to there, because we told them why. And so that's, to your point, Leo, that's what I think newspapers and media need to do too, is to, at the local level, as you were saying, is to find that need, like you said, and cover it. Because the San Francisco Chronicle, they might cover an election over in the San Joaquin Valley, but they're not going to tell you why the road's shut down on Alameda Boulevard this afternoon.
So that's the difference between watching the national news and your local news. And like you're talking about, whereas you may see stories on TV or in the regular newspaper about, national politics or whatever, you're specifically focused on Kentucky politics.
That's right. That's exactly right. Some national, we cover our federal delegation too, but.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Laura, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned previously, we will have information on how you can reach out to the Kentucky Gazette in the show notes. That is going to do it for us for this episode of the Sidewalk CEO. Yeah, that must have been it. That
was subliminal, right?
So, thanks for listening.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Sidewalk CEO podcast with Sherri Donahue of Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity and Leo Haggerty of TCHQ Communications. You can learn more about the Sidewalk CEO on the web at thesidewalkceo.com and on social media. The Sidewalk CEO is recorded in the studios of TCHQ Communications in Frankfort, Kentucky. Check us out next week for the next episode of the Sidewalk CEO.